Everything's a trilogy these days, or a series 15, 20, 35 books. But what if you just want a standalone, a one off? Lots to love, low commitment. That's the kind of fantasy you want to read. Well, today I've got you. Here are five fantastic standalone fantasy novels of all different types that I would recommend to anyone. Thanks for joining me today here at Fantasy for the Ages. I'm Jim, the father of this show. My son Zach and I do this to talk about books, and today I'm talking about fantasy, standalone fantasy novels that you might want to add to your reading list. Short and sweet, here are books that, if you haven't read them, I would totally recommend you do. A wide variety of books in these five, not just all of one type, but they are all one and done novels. You may want more after you've read them, but you won't need more. These books take you from the start on a journey to a finish, and life is good. Of course, I like to rank things, so I'm going to give these to you from bottom to top. I like all five of these, but like has degrees. Number five on my list here today is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, published back in 2006. This is part of the Cosmere, so it is tied to a whole bunch of other books, but you can read Elantris without paying any attention to the rest of the Cosmere, and you're going to enjoy it just fine. You're not missing out, there's not holes in your understanding. In theory, there will be a sequel to Elantris someday. That theory gets fainter and fainter as time goes along, and I don't actually think Brandon's going to circle back around now. I think he's moved on in what he's writing and where his focus is, but doesn't matter. You won't have to read the sequel. Elantris tells a story start to finish. This is Sanderson's first published book. So, honestly, you can kind of tell it's not as strongly written as many of his later novels. It's still well written, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I recommend it. Number four, Chesapeake Bay Monsters by Pete Kramer, published just last year, 2023. Totally different kind of novel compared to Elantris. This is not your classic fantasy. It does certainly have fantastical elements. Mermaids, anyone? But there is far more to the mystery of this novel than just mermaids. I found it to be a quick and interesting read, so if you're not wanting to have to commit too hard, this is the perfect book to try. It's also a little different from most of the type of fiction I tend to enjoy, so as I got into it, I was actually a little surprised to find how much I was enjoying this novel. That's why it definitely makes this list. It's quirky, it's different, it has fantasy elements, and it's just a good read. If you like a mystery, this is your book. One last thing to say about the book, the title. It's great. Chesapeake Bay Monsters. Because there are all types of monsters in this world. Number three, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, published in 2020. This fantasy novel is a little tough to pin down to just one category: historical fiction, romantasy, paranormal fantasy. It blurs a lot of lines. What most intrigues me about this standalone novel, though, and why it's making my recommendation list, is that despite my typical preferences, I liked this story. I shouldn't have. It checks a whole bunch of boxes of things that I usually avoid. And yet, it was good. Really good. A well constructed, well written narrative that engages you from start to finish. You want to know how it's going to work out for our protagonist, a woman who definitely gets more than she bargained for when she makes a deal with, well, you know. Number two, Warbreaker. Brandon Sanderson again, this time from 2009. Sanderson is a very prolific author, and he started that early. We've got Elantris in 2006. This is just 3 years later, but in between, he published five other novels, including the entire original Mistborn trilogy. Now, that experience, all those additional successful books that came out, it shows in Warbreaker. Again, while a standalone novel, Warbreaker is part of Sanderson's Cosmere collection, which also includes those three Mistborn books. If you read all of the Cosmere books, you will get more out of each of them because you'll pick up on extra little tie-ins and Easter eggs that Sanderson has embedded. But the way he writes these books, you don't have to read the others to enjoy the story. Warbreaker is a great example of this, a standalone fantasy novel with a story completely unto its own. It's got its own unique characters in this fantasy world experience, a very full fledged creation he came up with. It's got its own type of magic. It's got challenges unique to this story alone. What I value about Warbreaker is the innocence of many of the characters, a naivete that just kind of brings a little charm to the story. Of course, conflict is part of any good story, so the naive characters, their innocence comes crashing against some harsh realities in the story, and the innocence is going to have to change or die. Now, which does it do? Perhaps it does a little of both. Yet all innocence is not lost in this story, and it has a degree of, I guess I gotta say, charm again to it, and it leaves you with much to love. But now we come to number one, the story that stands well above all the others, and not just above the ones on this list, but pretty much against all books that are out there. This is Tagana. Guy Gavriel Kay is the author, written all the way back in 1990. And that's one of the things it's got going for it. My final book, this standalone fantasy novel, has stood the test of time for 34 years already. And still, people who know fantasy recognize this as one of the best ever. Imagine a wonderful kingdom full of upright and honorable people who fall to the magic of an evil power monger. They dared to oppose this all powerful leader of a rival nation, and they failed. Their punishment? Erasure. To be wiped from the knowledge of the world. To have all they stood for, all they accomplished, magically hidden from ever being discovered again. You can't even say the name of the place and have it be heard by others. It's gone. And it's the gift, or shall I say curse, that keeps on giving. So this is the tale of such a place, and what people eventually try to do to put things right. It's a powerful, magical, moving story that checks a good many of the fantasy boxes I do enjoy, and it's exceptionally well written in a style that at different times is both serious and light, heavy and humorous, switching between such tones in a masterful way that truly makes reading this story a delight. If nothing else from my list catches your attention, this is the book you should read. Don't believe me? Go Google it and see what people say about Tagana. It's not just me. Okay, there are plenty of other books out there as well, standalones that others may recommend, but I had to limit myself to the books I've read. I've read a lot of series, not as many standalones yet. There's a bunch that are on my TBR, and if I did this again a year or two from now, I might have other books that I'd insert on the list. Tagana would still be there. I don't have any doubts. Nevertheless, regardless of all those others, these five are some great recommendations. I hope you'll check them out. If you do and you enjoy them, let me know in the comment box. And if you've got any other standalones that you'd recommend to me, because I'm always looking for more, go ahead, put them down there. Give me more to add to my monstrous TBR. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.